Haramel tried to take her son after her husband's funeral, but when he spoke, everything changed. Rain fell steadily, soaking the edges of Nadia's black dupatta as she stood at the edge of the freshly dug grave, her 6-year-old son Zayan's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. The cemetery was quiet save for the soft sobs of distant relatives and the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against umbrellas. A thin fog of incense and wet earth clung to the air. Nadia's eyes remained fixed on the wooden coffin as it was slowly lowered into the ground, each creak of the ropes sounding like the unraveling of her life. Her husband, Adil, was gone, just like that. No final words. No goodbyes. One moment he had been her anchor, the next, a name etched on stone. Zayan didn't cry. He clutched a small toy car in his other hand, something he'd refused to let go of since the night he learned his father wouldn't be coming home. His lip trembled, but his eyes remained wide, unblinking, as if trying to understand the finality of the scene before him. Nadia bent slightly and kissed his damp forehead. Her voice caught in her throat as she whispered, "We'll be okay. I promise." Around them, whispers swirled like the wind. So young, and already a widow. Who'll help her raise him now? Didn't Farhat Begum already say she'd take the boy? Nadia's back stiffened. She turned her head slightly, and there she stood, Farhat Begum, dressed immaculately in an embroidered black shawl, her posture regal even in mourning. Her face was dry. Her eyes, sharp. No tears. No trembling lips. Just a gaze that lingered too long on Zayan. It wasn't grief that glinted in her expression, Nadia realized. It was something colder, more deliberate, calculation. As if she were already rearranging the pieces of her family's legacy in her mind, starting with the boy holding Nadia's hand. The silence in the house was different after the funeral. Heavier. It wasn't just the absence of Adil's voice echoing through the rooms or the empty space beside Nadia in bed, it was the presence of Farhat Begum that weighed on everything. She had arrived the day after the burial, claiming she couldn't bear to stay alone in her Islamabad home. "I'll only stay for a few weeks, Beta," she had said, setting down her luggage with an air of permanence that made Nadia's stomach twist. Those first few days passed in a blur of condolences and covered dishes. But once the guests stopped coming, the house changed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Farhat began to take control. She removed the curtains Nadia had chosen with Adil, replacing them with heavier, darker ones. The framed wedding photos on the living room wall disappeared one morning. In their place appeared a large, formal portrait of Farhat and a young Adil. She criticized the meals Nadia made, calling them too modern, too light, too bland. Zayan needs proper food. A growing boy needs ghee, not this olive oil business. Nadia bit her tongue, unwilling to spark a conflict in a house still draped in mourning. But her patience frayed each day. Then one night, as they sat in the lounge after Zayan had gone to bed, Farhat made her move. "You're doing your best," she said, her voice oddly soft. "But Zayan needs stability now. A routine. Familiar family. Maybe he should come live with me in Islamabad." Nadia's head snapped up. "What?" Farhat sipped her tea calmly. "It's just an idea. You can always come visit." Nadia's fingers tightened around her cup. "Here's my son." Farhat's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And my grandson. Try to think about what's best for him." The discovery came in the most unexpected way. Nadia was folding laundry in the bedroom when she heard Farhat on a phone call in the kitchen. The older woman's voice was low, but the words were unmistakable: custody, petition, emotional distress. Nadia stood frozen, heart thudding in her chest. When the call ended, she quietly made her way back to the laundry, her hands trembling. Later that evening, she confronted Farhat in the hallway. "Were you speaking to a lawyer?" Farhat didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her dupatta and replied, "I consulted someone, yes." "For what? You think you can just take my child from me?" Farhat's expression was calm but ruthless. "I don't think, Nadia. I act when it's necessary. You're grieving. You've lost weight, haven't returned to work, you cry at night when you think he isn't listening. You have no stable income, no long-term plan. That's not a fit environment for a child." Nadia's throat tightened. "You're wrong. I'm doing everything I can." Farhat stepped closer, her voice colder. You're young. You'll remarry someday. Someone else will give you another life. But Zayan? He needs his roots. His blood. His father's family. For the first time since Adil's death, Nadia felt something stronger than sorrow, rage. That night, after putting Zayan to sleep, she called the one person she thought might help, Cameron, Adil's best friend since childhood. He came over the next day, listening carefully as Nadia poured out the details. She's well connected, he said finally. Knows people in family court, charity boards, even a few judges socially. But Nadia, don't panic. She thinks I'm weak. Cameron looked her in the eye. She's betting on your silence. Don't let her win with quiet. You know your son better than anyone. She can't twist that unless you let her. The courtroom felt more like a battlefield than a place of justice. Nadia sat at the table, her palms damp with sweat, her breath shallow. The walls seemed to close in on her as Farhat Begum took the stand, dressed in an elegant beige shalwar kameez, her silver hair pinned neatly, her demeanor flawless. She spoke with poise, each word delivered like a carefully measured drop of honey. I have always been an active part of Zayan's life, she said to the judge. Since his birth, I have been there. After my son passed, I stepped in because my daughter-in-law was, understandably, distraught. I feared for the boy's emotional well-being. Children need structure, discipline. Not just love, but roots, tradition. She even produced photos, herself with Adil and Zayan, warm family moments that painted a picture of deep involvement. She never once raised her voice or shed a tear. It was all too perfect. Then came Nadia's turn. Her lawyer stood beside her, gently guiding her forward, but her legs felt like iron. On the stand, her voice quivered. I love my son more than anything. I may not have everything figured out yet, but I've never let him feel alone. We're healing. We're surviving. Together. Her words came in a rush, sometimes stumbling. She could feel the judgment in the air, about her age, her vulnerability, the crack in her voice. Then the judge cleared his throat and looked toward Zayan, who sat quietly near the front, flanked by a court-appointed counselor. Zayan, the judge said gently. Do you want to live with your grandmother or your mother? The room went still. Zayan looked up. His voice was soft but clear. I want to live with Mema. Because when I cry, she doesn't say I'm weak. She hugs me. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the judge blinked, visibly moved. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt sharper than usual, slicing through the tension that still clung to the air. Reporters lingered near the gates, whispering, waiting for reactions. As Nadia stepped down the stone steps, holding Zayan's hand tightly, she felt more exhausted than victorious. But at least her knees weren't trembling anymore. Farhat caught up to them in the courtyard, her heels clicking furiously against the concrete. Her perfectly drawn brows were furrowed, her voice hissing low enough to avoid attention, but fierce enough to wound. You coached him, she snapped, her teeth clenched. That wasn't a child speaking. That was you speaking through him. Nadia didn't flinch. Her grip on Zayan's hand tightened just slightly. No, she said calmly. I listened to him. That's the difference. You talk about what's best for him like he's a possession. I talk to him like he's a person. Farhat's nostrils flared, but she said nothing more. She turned abruptly, walking away with her shoulders still squared, as if dignity could be salvaged in defeat. The official ruling came down moments later. Nadia was granted full custody. Farhat would have supervised visits once a month, contingent on consistent behavior. The courtroom had seen many battles, but this one was personal and very public. As they stepped out to meet Cameron, who had been waiting nearby, he gave them both a wide grin. That boy of yours, he said, crouching to Zayan's level, just cracked a dynasty with a sentence. Zayan blinked, then smiled shyly. Nadia let out a long breath. For the first time in weeks, it felt like she could finally inhale without shaking. It started quietly, without any fanfare. One afternoon, while Nadia was cleaning up after lunch, she found Zayan at the kitchen table with a box of crayons he hadn't touched in months. His little brow was furrowed in concentration, his tongue poking out slightly as he colored within uneven lines. She watched from the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt or just observe. When he finally looked up and smiled, he held up the drawing like a prized treasure. "It's us," he said. "See? You and me. And that's Baba. He's watching from the sky." Nadia took the picture gently from his hands. It was simple and beautiful. A small figure of a boy, one of a woman with long hair, and above them, a big blue sky. Floating in a puffy white cloud was a red heart with Baba written in crooked letters inside. Something in her chest cracked open. A sob tried to surface, but she swallowed it down and pulled Zayan into her arms. He leaned into her easily, like he'd been waiting for that moment too. That night, as he slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Nadia sat with the drawing in her lap. His voice in court, his quiet strength, his innocent heart, it hadn't just saved him from being taken. It had reminded her who she was. Who she needed to be. She opened her laptop and created a blog. Little voice, loud heart. A space for other mothers. For healing. For hope. For her. The living room was quiet, filled with the faint ticking of the wall clock and the scent of freshly baked cake. Nadia sat nearby, watchful but calm, as Farhat settled onto the sofa, smoothing the creases in her shawl. It had been months since the court ruling, and this was the first supervised visit. Nadia didn't know what to expect. But the woman before her wasn't the Farhat who had stood in a courtroom with icy resolve. This version seemed softer. Smaller. Farhat reached into her handbag and pulled out a neatly wrapped package. She handed it to Zayan with a gentle smile. "A storybook," she said. "It was your father's favorite when he was little. It's about a lion cub who learns that speaking the truth is braver than fighting." Zayan unwrapped it carefully, flipping through the colorful Urdu pages with curious fingers. Then he looked up, his voice innocent, but piercing in its directness. "Dodi, why did you try to take me away from Mama?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any silence before it. Farhat blinked, her composure cracking. Her eyes shimmered. "Because," she whispered, "I lost my son. And in my fear, I thought I was going to lose you too. I didn't know any other way to hold on." Zayan stared at her, then slowly climbed into her lap, wrapping his small arms around her neck. Farhat hugged him back, eyes closed, tears finally falling. Across the room, Nadia watched quietly, her heart full and aching at once. The new apartment wasn't fancy. The paint on the walls was a little chipped, the balcony small, and the kitchen barely had space for two, but to Nadia and Zayan, it felt like freedom. It was theirs. No long shadows of legacy. No silent wars. Just laughter, homework on the floor, and pancakes on Sundays. Nadia unpacked slowly, decorating with pieces that meant something. Zayan's drawings, framed quotes from her blog, and photos of her and Adil that reminded her of love, not loss. The flat smelled of cinnamon tea and hope, and with every passing week, it felt more like home. Her blog, Little Voice, Loud Heart, began to gather attention. Mothers wrote in, widows, single parents, women in pain, thanking her for putting into words what they couldn't. Encouraged, Nadia started a weekly meetup at the local community center. Just a handful of women at first, but slowly, the circle grew. They laughed, cried, even danced. Healing wasn't linear, but together, it felt possible. Zayan, too, was changing. His drawings became brighter. He spoke more freely in class. When a new boy at school lost his father, Zayan sat with him at lunch every day until he smiled again. One night, after storytime, Nadia pulled the blanket over him and whispered, like she always did, "Your voice is your power. Never let anyone steal it." He looked at her, serious-eyed. "Even if they are bigger?" She kissed his forehead. "Especially then." The envelope arrived a week before Eid, simple, cream-colored, with Farhat's distinct cursive handwriting on the front. Nadia stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was an invitation, Eid dinner at the old family home, extended warmly to both her and Zayan. She read it twice, unsure how to feel. Zayan looked up from his coloring book and asked, "Are we going?" Nadia hesitated. The memories of that house, of grief, of tension, of courtroom whispers, still lived inside her. But so did Zayan's hug to his grandmother. So did the drawing with Baba in the sky. We'll go, she said finally. But we walk in as who we are now. Not who we were then. On the evening of Eid, the house looked just as grand as ever, chandeliers glowing, silverware glinting, relatives murmuring their surprise at Nadia's arrival. Some eyes were curious. Some judgmental. But all turned quiet when Farhat stood from her seat at the table. She raised a glass of rose sherbet and looked directly at Nadia, then at Zayan. I owe my family a truth, she said. In my grief, I tried to replace my son with control. I tried to preserve something by taking what wasn't mine to hold. But Zayan reminded me, love isn't about possession. It's about presence. A hush followed, then polite claps. Zayan leaned into Nadia's side and whispered, "Did she mean that?" Nadia nodded, her voice soft. "It's a start." And it was, the start of something fragile but real. Peace, cautiously blooming. The lights in the studio were bright, but Nadia sat calmly, her hands resting in her lap as the cameras rolled. Across from her, the host offered a kind smile and asked, "When did everything shift for you?" Nadia took a breath, her voice steady but gentle. "It was the moment my son spoke in court. The judge had asked him a simple question, where he wanted to live. And his answer wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't influenced. It was honest." She glanced at the small audience watching in silence. He said, "I want to live with Mama. Because when I cry, she doesn't say I'm weak. She hugs me." That moment broke something open. In the courtroom, in my heart, in all of us. It reminded me that children are not property. They are people. And sometimes, their honesty is our salvation. The host nodded, visibly moved. Nadia's story rippled across screens that night, shared by parents, counselors, and educators. Her inbox flooded with messages. Her blog received a surge of readers. But all of that paled in comparison to what happened at home. That evening, curled up on the sofa with a bowl of popcorn, Zayan watched the interview on TV. When it ended, he looked at his mother, wide-eyed. "I was brave, heh?" Nadia reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. "You changed everything." He grinned. "Maybe one day I'll be a judge too." She pulled him into her arms, holding him close. "Maybe you already are, baby. You already are."